cash flow is what you get out at the end when you're done. You can make $100,000 every year, but then when you get to the end, you hope that, yeah, okay, all the 25 years of sweat labor I put in, now I can bear some of the fruit from actually passing on the business to the next guy too.
Good morning, Dylan. Welcome to the Ask Anthem podcast, where we break down complex tax issues and topics into clear strategic takeaways. My name is Tyson Pruett. I am the managing partner here at Anthem Strategist. And Dylan, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
My name is Dylan Huff. I'm actually an enrolled agent. I also work here at Anthem Strategist in the Scottsdale office. Happy to be here.
Well, thanks for joining us, Dylan. Appreciate having you on. So today's episode, we're going to be talking about the Phoenix Scottsdale hospitality topic is what we've got today. And we're going to kind of go over what's happening in the industry, why it's growing, how can our business owners in this area use complex strategies, whether it's tax strategies or just good business strategies to help them thrive and be successful.
Sounds good.
Phoenix and Scottsdale feel like they've really exploded in the last few years. We've got a lot of new hotels, restaurant, bars, things going on. So we kind of wanted to walk through some of what's happening maybe behind the scenes and go from there. So to kick things off, Dylan, you've been here for some time. What's some of your favorite hotspots or places that you like to go?
Yeah, so I live in North Scottsdale, and so I absolutely love that area up by the Kierland Commons. I think Scottsdale is mostly known for its golf, but honestly, there's just a number of cool and fun things to do. I've got 3 kids, and there's also never an ending of fun things to do on the weekends. Like you said, I've been here now for about 15 years, and even just to see the absolute explosion in various activities, especially surrounding those hospitalities. There's no shortfall of fun things to do and places to go and restaurants to be. Even one of the best places that really kind of think it's kind of underrated is heading down to downtown Chandler, even which is just a little bit south of us here. Just such a cool little place to walk around, enjoy a little small town with great nightlife, but great happy hours, and really just a very cool environment that we live in out here in Scottsdale.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's such an interesting finding kind of the little pockets and the difference even between Old Town Scottsdale and just a little bit farther north or south has an entirely different vibe, different feel to it. One of the things that I recently got introduced to that was a really fun experience, I don't know if you've been there, but there's a restaurant and bar right at the Scottsdale airport where you can sit outside on the patio and basically be completely deaf as the planes come in and out, and it kind of breaks the conversation up. But man, that's a fun spot. It's got some some wonderful things going on.
Well, and you bring up an awesome point. I think even as you're sitting here in Scottsdale and, you just take the drive right up Scottsdale Road, you come across so many various just little niches of cool little places. And then, you kind of even get all the way to the end of Scottsdale Road and you hit Carefree and you're like, I'm kind of in the Old West all of a sudden. I went from, this nice luxurious city of Scottsdale to kind of having this now small town Old Westy feel like they've got up there. So it is really, really cool to just kind of explore all the different areas we've got to offer.
So kind of big picture, what are some of the reasons that Scottsdale is growing? Well, we'll call it just Phoenix as a whole. What are some of the things do you think that's causing this growth?
It is an interesting thing because you look at some of the even just neighboring states around us that really have not seen the same level of growth. And I tell people all the time when they ask, what's it like living there in the summer when it's 110 all the time? It's really not that bad, but honestly, the amount of things to do and places to be, even when the heat is there. I think that there's just this huge community of entrepreneurs, but also just things that are always moving and always exciting. There's a great job market here in Scottsdale and Phoenix and the surrounding area. Again, the absolute lovely scenery that we can get all year round. Even right now, as we're having this conversation, it's January and it's hard to complain when it's 75 degrees outside. It's absolutely wonderful, and I think that secret got out, and now you've just seen this huge influx of people that are like, hey, the heat's actually not that bad in the summer, especially when you got a swimming pool in your backyard. But in the wintertime, I know that you're up there in Salem, Oregon, and you came down to visit, and it's night and day compared to what winter's like in the rest of the country compared to what we get here. And I think that secret kind of got out, and now people are really starting to flood in from all walks of life and all across the country. And meet people from the Midwest, from California, from back east that all have kind of found their home here in Phoenix and Scottsdale. And so we're just part of that boom.
Yep, I was doing some research here recently, and since 2020, so it's been growing exponentially. My family, my parents both grew up here, siblings were born here in Phoenix. The changes that I've seen from 40 years ago when the freeway, the 10, didn't even actually go all the way through town. It stopped on one side and you had to go through arterials and then picked up again on the other to where it is today. But even in the last 5-6 years, the Phoenix metro area has seen, I think it was about 6.5% growth, which is one of the fastest growing areas still in the country.
Yeah.
So it hasn't slowed down, but then you start thinking about it. Not only is the weather good, but you have events like today. I'm sitting here this afternoon. I'm going to be going to the Fiesta Bowl. So you have this major sports events. You have Super Bowls. You have spring training. You've got all of these events, the Wealth Management Open. You have like major concerts. There's so much that happens here. It's a wonderful place from that perspective. You get a lot of people moving in. I know I was talking to my in-laws as they're getting older about where are areas that have really, really good health care that's really designed for a community and folks that are aging and needing some additional care down the line. This area has that as well. There's just a lot of really positive things that come out of why would someone want to be here, besides the fact that you're right, about 9 months out of the year it's amazing, and the other 3 months it's tolerable.
Yeah. Well, you bring up a good point too. I think that we do have this huge healthcare sector that almost runs adjacent to the hospitality industry, because we do have an older demographic of people that do end up deciding to spend, their retired years here in Phoenix and in Scottsdale and Sun City and Surprise. And with that, we need a lot of really highly qualified medical professionals. But I also, we have a lot of older clients. We know their families come out here to visit all the time. And, we hear the stories all the time too, where, families will come visit from Illinois to visit their retired parents, and then all of a sudden they're like, hey, this place is pretty awesome, and then they end up just kind of packing up and coming out and visiting and staying as well. It's, like I said, we've just got so many wonderful restaurants and bars and hotels and activities and concerts and car shows, and you name it, you can find it here in Scottsdale.
So kind of leaning into some of the theme here of what we do, give me a feel for what makes Arizona appealing. Are there some things about Arizona specifically that give it a competitive advantage from a tax and business perspective?
Yeah. So I think the first thing, just piggybacking even off the growth, there are so many niche little industries you can find out here right now. Even the semiconductor space has exploded with the demand, and a lot of that is because of the favorable tax environment that Arizona is able to offer, especially some of our higher income earners, because we do just have a flat state income tax, which is pretty low at 2.5%, especially compared to some of our surrounding neighbor states. And that really does allow not only for businesses to be able to set up shop here and take advantage of some of our wonderful tax credit programs, but also the employees that then work for those businesses get to keep more of that money in their pocket. And then at the same time, we really don't sacrifice a whole lot in the terms of infrastructure or of those amenities, because there are still some taxes that, make their way through and, hit Arizona taxpayer pockets. But at the end of the day, that income tax is so favorable that employees even get to really enjoy keeping more of that money in their pocket, as opposed to paying out, 9, 10, 11% in some states that are close by to us.
Yeah, and I know one of the things that I really like, Arizona has some wonderful, both on the individual side and on the business side, some tax credit programs where you really can help target the dollars to charities or causes that are near and dear to you. Now, you can't, as you get upper income, you can't pay all of it into that, but you can direct a lot of your tax dollars to education or charities or veterans, or there's just a lot of different opportunities and ways, which is wonderful. And as you mentioned, at 2.5%, which is the individual tax rate, compared to California, compared to Oregon, Colorado, a lot of these states are around us, it's so favorable. And my experience has been, one of the other things that I really like about Arizona, they're very business friendly as you're working with them. The government really leans into, you have a question, you call, they're going to work really closely with you to help you be successful. They see the business owner, the employer, the people that are helping provide the jobs that make this whole thing work, they see them as an advocate. And I think that's a real positive thing for.
Well, and even for us, like in the tax field, how many times have we had somebody come in that says, "Hey, I'm ready to start my own business," and then we kind of give them the steps of what it takes to actually, get the LLC filed here in Arizona, and they're like, "Wait, that's it?" And it's like, "Yeah, that's it," because I think there's that spirit of entrepreneurship that really the Arizona climate. They want business owners to be out here creating jobs, doing good things. So they really have removed a lot of the friction. So even aside from the taxes, getting your own business up and running out here is not a 6-month long process. It's not a long thing. You could get it done in an afternoon and have your LLC filed and be at the bank just to open up your bank account and be rocking and rolling. And it's incredible that they've made it so seamless for everyday people to start the American dream out here in Arizona in that regard.
Absolutely. Moving into kind of the topic of hospitality as we're leaning into that. When people hear hospitality, I think the immediate response is kind of the restaurants, right? Restaurants and bars. But really it's broader than that. So what types of hospitality businesses are you seeing right now?
So besides the bars and restaurants like you had mentioned, I think the biggest thing is a lot of our hospitality surrounds those events that we do year round out here in Arizona. We see a ton of short-term rentals, a ton of super niche, cool kind of boutique hotels that have kind of been popping up. Again, a lot of venues, places to actually host those events. Again, we've got a huge corporate climate out here too, where people come and they host their events at various places out here. That we've got different wellness concepts and things like that. And then you have mentioned earlier some of the nightlife that we kind of got, between Tempe kind of being that college town, but even then you move up into Old Town Scottsdale, you can really walk around and probably spend, an entire evening and barely scratch the surface of what some of those areas have to offer. And so the hospitality industry here really does. It spans and it kind of self-feeds itself. We've got these wonderful events and these different things that happen, like spring training every single year. Spring training rolls in, and oh man, every hotel around those baseball stadiums is absolutely booked to the brim, because it really does surround those events and those things that we've got to keep people here and have a good time.
Yeah, and I think that also leans in. I know like the Sheridan downtown has gone through a mass upgrade, and it's spectacular what they're doing there.
It's beautiful.
You have things like that where things are coming in. The short term, as you mentioned, things like spring training, or we talked about events, the Super Bowl, or these kinds of things. So you get a lot of also sort of the short-term rental. So hospitality leans into also things like your Airbnb and this kind of thing. I'll throw something else out too that admittedly is near and dear to me. There's a wonderful cigar scene in this area. Arizona, I believe, if I remember the statistic correctly, Arizona is the third largest state in the U.S. when it comes to cigar sales. And there's just wonderful, depending on what you're looking for, wonderful opportunities there. So it's a great place from the overall hospitality perspective.
Yep. I also feel like we've got no shortage of space. I think that's one of the nice things about the Phoenix landscape as a whole, compared to I think some of the major cities that were built, 150, 100 years ago. Phoenix is still a relatively new city. Arizona was one of the last, it's the state 48, one of the last states actually added to, to be one of the 50 states. And so I think we've had a good opportunity to do a lot of planning around what we want this city and what we want the environment to look like, that there are a lot of public spaces too. I mean, you were talking about how you love cigars. I'm personally a car guy, and I love that I could go out on a Saturday afternoon and find no shortage of car shows and things to do, just because we have the available space to do that you would never find in a place like New York City, because there's just too much density. So we've got so much sprawling landscape to enjoy all these wonderful hospitality and events as well.
So what are some of the most common mistakes and surprises that hospitality or business owners run into?
I think the biggest thing, and this is not specific to hospitality, people get really, business owners, entrepreneurs, they get really passionate, really good at their thing. I mean, again, that's why they wanted to start their own business in it in the first place. And then I think some of the big tax missteps they start to make is they don't always put the right team in place to take care of the things that they're not good at. I think we all kind of have that problem too, where we don't want to admit that we don't know. But the tax code, whether we like it or not, and it's by design, it's a complex tool that can be used by business owners to kind of help either grow their business or unfortunately suffocate their business if they don't, implement the things in the correct way. So I think that's one of the first big mistakes I see, is that people don't always put the right people in place. I mean, we just recently were working with a client who, we found out that he was selling his bar that was inside a commercial building, and the commercial building, the depreciation wasn't set up correctly on it, and he's wondering why he's not getting all the proper tax benefits he should have from this beautiful commercial building he's got. But how do you really kind of put some of the right people and the right strategies in place from the get-go, he probably would have seen a lot more of those tax benefits, and maybe also would have enjoyed, kind of gotten a little bit more fruit out of the business over the years that he did own it before selling it. I think that's the first thing. I think the other part of it too is just there are a lot of those unique Arizona-specific tax credits and things like you had mentioned that, I really would encourage business owners to really fully take advantage of. And if they aren't aware of what those things are, you had mentioned too, the state of Arizona is wonderful at helping advocate for business owners. And they've got a whole list of resources available to get those things kind of moving to help our business owners really, take advantage of our favorable tax environment here in the state and in the city.
So some of the things that I see kind of piggybacking on that, especially for folks that are just starting out, I think understanding or underestimating what it's actually going to cost to get going. And part of that to me is a lot of times people will understand or correctly project to get to day one opening the doors. What they don't look at are, okay, but what if people aren't knocking the doors down immediately, because there are a lot of great places here. So as I'm getting the word out, how do I make sure that I have enough cash flow and runway to get to month 6 or month 12? What are the overall cash flow needs of it? One of the other things that is very interesting to me, and I see it and I'm reminded of it every spring and fall, is just the seasonality that we have, because there is a lot of folks that don't spend their summers here. But just because I don't have a lot of customers coming in June, July, and August doesn't mean that I still don't need to keep my key people employed. My rent still pays the same. My electricity costs are probably going to go up because I still have to AC. So you have this seasonality, and so whether it's having the available cash on hand, planning ahead, having a good partner in a bank for things like line of credit, these kinds of things are really key for folks to make sure that they have in place.
Yeah, I agree. And again, I mean, even when it gets down to the nitty gritty of actually then, churning all those sales and having all those employees and providing those jobs, I think a lot of times we see people start to run into issues where they, start running into sales tax misunderstandings where, we do actually have sales tax in this state. It's one of the ways that Arizona can keep our state income tax so low. But then the business owners need to make sure they're tracking those things properly and making those payments. Again, the systems that are set up are available and there's tons of resources, but a lot of times, especially when you're going from being an employee to being a business owner, you don't always think about, wait a second, who's actually making those sales tax payments? How do I do that? And the same thing going from an employee even over to a business owner, then you've got, issues that are surrounding payroll and how do we stay compliant with those things? How do we stay compliant with local and state laws when it comes to employment? And those are all the little things that can also hang you up as you start to try and grow your business. I mean, I know for me personally, I owned a business for years, as you know, in the healthcare space. And I'll never forget when I got the stamp that we no longer could keep our employees as 1099 contractors, that we had to put them actually as W-2s, because those types of legislation changes do take place sometimes. And it was such a headache to have to now all of a sudden understand what it meant to have all these W-2 employees that were no longer just contracted employees, because there's a whole slew of things that go along with that when it comes to payroll tax and also, our obligations to them. But yeah, I mean, there's also a few little things, again, I know in the city of Scottsdale compared to the city of Phoenix, there are some local tax things that also go into place depending on what type of business you're running, and the hospitality industry is one of them. I know that some people that run into with the short-term rentals when they're hosting a short-term rental in Scottsdale versus like hosting a short-term rental like out in the city of Surprise. There are different taxes that kind of fall into that, and even though they seem, they think, oh, it's going to be just like the last one, there are those little things that they need to always be kind of ticking off their boxes to make sure they've got everything and they're staying compliant.
Yeah, and really having that advocate for you that's been there, done that is so critical. Putting that team around you. I know one of the biggest challenges that I see the business owner have, or one of the easy mistakes they make, is getting behind in the payroll taxes.
Oh yeah.
It's one of those easy places that business owners cut corners, and it's one of the worst possible ways that you can, because if you get behind on your payroll taxes, the IRS doesn't get too angry at a delinquent filer, delinquent payer that often. I mean, it happens. But the IRS views payroll taxes, and correctly so, it's other people's money. And so
Yep.
when you're not paying in other people's money, when you're not paying in your employees' withholdings and the taxes, the IRS does not like that. And so that's one of the areas that I think is a common mistake that I see when it comes into some pitfalls that I don't want people to do. A couple other things that are maybe opportunities, maybe not pitfalls, but opportunities for people to know is really do a good job of tracking tips. There is a actual tax credit. It's called a tips credit that anybody that has employees that are getting tipped can qualify for. So that's something that really is important to do. The IRS has a certain amount that they expect. If you're in a traditionally tipped industry, they're expecting a certain level of tips. They know. And so, report that correctly. One of the other things that if you're in the restaurant specific world, there are, track what you give to charitable organizations from sort of that finished meal perspective.
Yeah.
There's some rather unique opportunities for good tax deductions in donated food. And so those are a couple things. Not knowing the proper way to handle some of those industry specific areas are also areas that I think people can miss the boat on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think running a business, again, it's a whole different beast. I think one of the big things, it's one thing to be able to budget your own personal finances, and I don't think enough people do that on their own. But I think that then when you're a business owner, that's where a lot of we like to really emphasize with our clients that we like to be ahead of the game. We want to be doing tax planning with you way before March, April of that year. We want to be sitting down with you in June of the year prior, planning for what our tax situation is going to look like in the following year, so we can taking advantage of some of those credits, make sure that we're budgeting out our quarterly tax payments correctly so that we don't fall behind, and so that we can really, kind of make those tactical decisions when we have the opportunity without falling behind.
Yeah. No, I think that's the, one of the things that we see is that being proactive, having a strategic approach, knowing where you're going, what the scenarios are, and the cash flow. Restaurants, hospitality as a whole, there are a lot of challenges with hospitality. It's not necessarily a high margin business. There's a lot of moving parts. And so really tracking, having good cash flow controls, tracking all of that, I think is really a key thing.
And I think also then having an idea of what our business owners' final end goal also. I think that's one of the discussions we have with our business owners quite often. Hey, you're starting this beautiful hotel or this bar and this restaurant. What is the end game? Are we going to be buying more? Are we going to be opening more bars and restaurants? Are we going to be, starting several small short-term rentals across the state? Are we planning to sell this business at some point on the open market? All those things really change the way that we kind of counsel our clients from the tax planning perspective, because, it's just as important as cash flow as what you get out at the end when you're done. You can make $100,000 every year, but then when you get to the end, you hope that, all the 25 years of sweat labor I put in, now I can bear some of the fruit from actually passing on the business to the next guy too.
Well, you bring up a good point. So let me sort of throw this at you. Let's say someone does have a really successful business, right? They created this hospitality business, rocking and rolling in one location, and they're like, you know what? I'd really like to expand to a second location. What are some thoughts and suggestions for someone that's thinking about that?
Yes, I think the first thing that we would probably recommend is making sure that we've got everything set up from a tax return perspective, that they'd be able to qualify for any sort of financing if that's something they're looking at doing. I think sometimes, especially when people are going from their first location to their second location, and then they go to apply for some of that financing. Well, maybe we were taking some deductions that they were entitled to over the past several years, but then when it hits the tax return, it looks a little different because we were able to save them that money in tax in year 1, 2, and 3, but now it's year 4, and we're trying to get, a $500,000 loan, let's say, for building number 2. And the bank's like, it looks like you're making $25,000 a year. We're not giving you a $500,000 loan. When in reality, they probably were making more like, $100,000 a year. But because we were taking advantage of some of those, some of those tax credits and some of those tax deductions, then the bank gets a little like, hey, I don't know about this. And so I think that might be the first thing that we probably suggest is making sure that we have those long-term goals, that when we're doing a tax planning, when we're looking at how we want to do the next step, that we've got the financing available if that's what they want to do. And then I think the next thing too is to make sure that they know, what's the plan when we open the second one. Are we going to be opening another one in Scottsdale, or are we opening another one in Phoenix? Make sure that we understand how those two different cities, even though it's I know very different than in Oregon, where here in Scottsdale you could accidentally drive into Phoenix and then accidentally drive back into Scottsdale and not even know that you crossed into two different cities, because they all do kind of lay on top of each other. So there's some different tax things that end up happening, different tax credits available based on the city location you're in as well, just zip code alone. I think those would be my first two things. And then yes, also as we start to then open up location number 2, 3, and 4, continuing to just pull the different levers that we need to pull to make sure that we're keeping the most money in our pockets, we continue to employ the most people and grow our business as healthy as possible, but then also again staying as compliant as we can, so that we don't ever end up with a situation where we're in hot water with the IRS.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one of the other things that I see is how you properly structure the growth from an entity perspective, making sure working with qualified professionals on, for example, the legal side, and making sure that you have everything set up. And do you want everything in one entity? Do you want to create separate entities for asset protection? Or maybe you have slightly different ownership. Maybe you're bringing in an investor on opportunity number 2, and just really making sure that you're maximizing your setup, your structure, all of that between where you're going is also one of the things, because once it's done, it's relatively easy to set things up properly from the start. Once you're partway down the road, once that ship's been launched down the river, changing course gets a lot more complicated, a lot more expensive to do.
Yep.
So, well, we're getting probably fairly close to the end of our time here. Let me just ask you a couple things real quick. What are some of the biggest mistakes you see tax-wise?
I think the biggest mistake that I see business owners making is not making their quarterly tax payments like they should be. It's something where, yes, you could argue that it's nice to have the extra cash flow and the extra cash in the business at the time, but I think that sometimes it's really easy to miss one quarterly payment, and then all of a sudden now you miss a second quarterly payment, and then it comes, maybe you paid 2 out of the 4 throughout the year, and then it comes tax time, and then we've got to talk about penalties and interest that kind of also accrued. Not to mention then, again, also from the cash flow perspective, nobody wants to sit down and write, a giant check, because it can cripple a business. So I think that's the first thing we start to see. I think, again, one of the biggest also things that we start to see is when we do have some of that seasonality that goes into some of the business, how are we managing, making those quarterly tax payments? Because they are, usually exactly the same 4 quarterly tax payments. And let's say that your business is very heavily relied on the winter months when it's cooler and you've got different things going on here in the summertime, then you still have to make a quarterly tax payment in June. And so you have to make sure that you've actually got everything set up to where you are ready to make that payment. I think those are probably the biggest things. I think, again, taking the timing, I think one big thing is we always talk about with our business owners too, is timing. As legislation changes, as new opportunities become available, we can kind of coach our business owners on maybe the right time to buy that next piece of equipment, go out and buy that vehicle, go and make the expansion based on what the different legislation can be. And sometimes just being able to talk with a professional, whether, again, that be an attorney, a business attorney, or be our, like us, tax professionals over here, it can really, really make a big difference when we decide to take, when we decide to go buy the next truck, and how that can really affect our tax situation. I mean, what are some of the things that you've also seen just in the years of experience that you've had that you find business owners falling into from a tax perspective?
Yeah, I think you kind of hit on the big one, especially in seasonality, which is once you get behind in taxes or any payments, do everything that you can, stay properly capitalized, go in with a plan. I think one of the common mistakes that someone that's moved out of being an employee into a business owner, they don't understand how critical understanding their financials are and being able to use that as a tool. So often, I say the box of receipts at the end of the year. Anymore, it's not really a box of receipts, it's an email box full of bank statements at the end of the year. And it's like, hey, would you put these numbers together? And it's like, how did you run a business if you didn't know if you were profitable, if you didn't know what your margins were, if you didn't know where your cash flow was. So I think, really just the biggest mistake. And if you don't have your records good, you're probably going to be paying more in tax than you should. And so I think that's really lean into running your business by the numbers is probably the biggest mistake that I see most often in this world.
Well, I think having that commitment to doing it on an ongoing basis, understanding your numbers, keeping track of those things, making sure that business owners are taking, usually, when I was running my business for years, I'd take one day a month just to sit down, make sure my QuickBooks was all in line, make sure my mileage was all logged correctly, make sure that my employees had submitted their receipts correctly. I just sat down with a woman, very, very sweet lady. Her husband does heavy equipment, machinery. Basically, he's an automotive technician for giant Caterpillar tractors. Very, very cool job. I was, talking to her, and I was looking at her previous year return, and I'm like, there's no way that your husband only drove 2,500 miles for work last year. I'm like, you tell me he drives to Yuma basically once or twice a week, which for people who are not familiar with the area around here, Yuma is nowhere close to Phoenix or Scottsdale. It's even further it's basically down by the border. And so I was like, there's no way he only drove 3,500 miles. I'm like, and that's something that you guys missed out on, probably a good, another $3,000-$4,000 in tax deductions because of the mileage alone. But she even admitted, she's like, yeah, I think he just kind of threw that number on there at the end of the year because he thought it sounded right. And I'm like, well, I think that there's a lot of tools out there now where you can literally get an app on your phone where anytime he gets in, he can just say, hey, yeah, that one was for work. Hey, that one was personal. Some of those little things can be done, pretty easily. But I think, again, like you said, somebody especially going from being a W-2 employee like this gentleman was to now operating on his own, he was never in a really good habit of doing those things on a regular basis to maintain good records.
Right. Well, as we wrap up, if there was sort of one thing for me that I'm going to cheat a little bit. One thing, but I'm going to do multiple parts. I think the biggest key to me really with any business, but especially in hospitality, be properly capitalized and organized, know your numbers so that you can adjust your pricing as necessary, and really be prepared for seasonality. I think those are kind of to me, the key takeaways, particularly in this market. What about you, Dylan?
Yeah, I think I would piggyback off that too. And I think the biggest thing I would say for business owners too is if it stops being fun, that's when it's probably your time to get out. And that's where I always encourage our business owners to always have an exit plan. Because I think really we're passionate people, entrepreneurs, even people like us that work with entrepreneurs every day, very passionate people about what they do. But if they ever get to the point where they start feeling that pressure, that burnout, having the exit strategy is probably the best thing that they could ever do for themselves and do for their family and do for their long-term success. And so that'd be the thing I would also recommend, is always have the exit in mind.
Excellent. Good ideas. Well, to wrap up, just want to recommend and suggest a couple other things. Make sure you're working with professionals, having a solid team in your corner, not just tax, but attorneys, insurance advisors, wealth management. Professionals are worth their weight in gold. I think that's a really key thing for people to do. Stay updated and educated. Things change all the time. The world is constantly changing, faster now than ever before, and slower today than it will be tomorrow is the other piece of things. So stay educated, stay up to date. With that in mind, would ask you, go ahead, feel free to subscribe to Ask Anthem for more tax tips, more education. We try and keep things not just solely tax, but really what you need to know as a business to stay ahead of things. Feel free to visit our website, stay in touch with us on our socials. All of those links are listed below. And thank you so much for joining us. And Dylan, thanks for being on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tyson.
Have a good one.
You too.